All right. Good afternoon. It is now 7 p.m., and I will call the Sewage and Water Board Governance Committee meeting to order. Special counsel, please call the roll.
Director Scruggs?
Present.
Director Cole?
Here.
Director Kennedy?
Here.
Director Thomas? Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, two housekeeping items before we get into the substance of our agenda. First, at this time, I'd like to add a discussion item to the agenda to discuss House Bill 573 and its substitute, House Bill 1243. We will need unanimous approval on this motion to add this item to the agenda. May I have a motion to add this item?
So moved.
A second?
I'll second.
Thank you. It's been properly moved and seconded. Are there any questions? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. The second is I'd like to amend item 3A to clarify that the executive session is for the purpose of receiving legal advice from counsel regarding potential litigation exposure, regulatory risk, and legal implications of House Bill 573 and its substitute bill, House Bill 1243. We will also need unanimous approval on this motion. May I have a motion, please?
I'll move. Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Any questions?
I do have a question. I just don't see in the open meetings law, when there's a discussion of potential litigation, ordinarily there are requirements in 4219. You have to identify parties, what have you. I just don't see the express exception in the open meetings law complied with.
Understood. Any other questions?
I just want to put on the record, I think this is quite concerning that this agenda was put out last week, and now it's being amended on the fly at the 11th hour. You know, this agency in the city of New Orleans has probably the worst approval rating in the city, and now I can see why. I think it's egregious that we're not giving the public the courtesy of being more transparent. So I just want to put that on the record that I think this is grossly out of order.
Thank you, Councilmember Hughes.
Madam Chair, since I'm here representing the mayor, she has the right to sit on committees. Is that correct?
She's an ex officio of the board, and she certainly does.
Okay. So as her designee, would I have the right to vote today?
Yes.
Okay. All right, then I would vote nay on amending the agenda to have an executive session to discuss litigation.
Okay, so to be clear, the motion is to clarify the executive session item. So we can move forward with the executive session item on the agenda without the clarification. But at this point, we have a motion on the floor that's been properly moved and seconded. I want to make sure there are no other questions on the floor before we move to a vote. Okay, all those in favor?
Can you recap? All in favor for which part?
Sure. So the motion is to amend 3A to clarify that executive session is for the purpose of receiving legal advice from legal counsel regarding potential litigation exposure, regulatory risk, and legal implications of proposed legislation, HB 573, and its substitute, House Bill 1243.
So I do have a question. So when in our regular agenda item, we cite statute, right? And so I'm asking for special counsel to give us advice on if we do amend, are we still within the realm of what's listed here? Can you?
I'm sorry. What was
That's
the
okay.
question?
So when we go into executive session, there are always statutes that are referenced.
That is correct.
And so my question is, we're being asked if we would like to amend. Are we still within the realm of these statutes, or are there other statutes that apply for what's being proposed?
No, we're still within that. We're still within the rim.
Okay.
Any other questions?
And I guess I just want to comment, because I think it is a substantive change to move from discussing the legislative session generally to kind of talking about potential litigation. I think that's a substantive and meaningful change, which is while I'll vote on the mayor's behalf, as I will when the question is called.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? All right, so again, to reiterate, the motion on the floor is to amend 3A to clarify that the executive session is for the purpose of receiving legal advice from counsel regarding potential litigation exposure, regulatory risk, and legal implications of House Bill 573 and its substitute, House Bill 1243. Hearing no further questions, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, those oppose?
Nay.
All right, the motion fails. So we have one additional item, a discussion item, and then we have our existing executive session. Council, when we get to that item on the agenda, you can guide us into what is appropriate for executive session and what will take place in open session. All right, with that, we will move on to item, sorry. Yes. What'd you say? Oh, thank you, thank you. Director Kennedy is noted appropriately that we recognize the other board members in the room for the record. Director Pacho is here, Director Greenidge is here, and Mr. Adam Swansik, from Executive Council of the Mayor's Office, is also here on behalf of the mayor. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. So the next item on our agenda, or the first discussion item, is evaluation process for,
You forgot another board member.
oh, I'm so sorry. Apologies, I was looking this way. Apologies.
I'm used to being forgotten.
We recognize that Councilmember Jason Hughes, who's also director, is here. My apologies, Councilmember Hughes. Did I forget anything else, Dr. Kennedy?
No, I think we're in good shape.
Thank you so much. I apologize. All right, so moving on, we have the evaluation process for executive leadership. At this time, I'll move to defer the evaluation process. Just to give you a little background, in our last committee meeting, we reviewed a schedule of evaluation that starts with Q2, allowing our executive leadership to provide goals and then draft KPIs that would be considered both by this committee and also by the board. We were initially scheduled to have that at an upcoming board meeting. That's how we aligned in our last committee meeting. But our executives have been putting out fires, including an incident that took place a couple days ago, and then also helping us to grapple with what's happening legislatively. And so we are given the courtesy of more time to prepare and present those items. So may I have a motion to defer discussion item A?
Second.
Thank you. It's been properly moved and seconded that we defer. Any questions to that regard? All right, hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, at this time, we will begin our discussion on House Bill 573 and its amended substitute bill, House Bill 1243. Special Counsel?
Okay, at this time, this Office of Special Counsel will make a presentation regarding the House Bill 573 and the substituted House Bill 1243. I will present to you Assistant Special Counsel Darren Levi Bakay, and I just want to add that present from the Special Counsel's offices, Deputy Special Counsel Mary Arsenault, and they have done extensive research regarding this matter and are prepared to make a presentation.
1 second, if I can interject, guys, and apologies again, I'm a little out of step today, but I wanted to provide a framing for today's discussion before you get into, okay, thank you. So before we begin, I want to briefly frame the purpose of this item from a governance perspective. The committee's role is to ensure that we're exercising appropriate due diligence with respect to any proposed changes that can affect the utility structure, its operations, and its financial position, and even this board's legal liability. So today's discussion will include this open consideration, identification of any key operational, legal, and financial questions that are unanswered, and documentation of areas where further clarity is needed, okay? To be clear for everyone in the room, this discussion is not about support or opposition to the proposed legislation. It is about ensuring that we have evaluated it through the lens of execution, accountability, and long-term impact on the ratepayers. Okay, with that, I'll turn it back over to special counsel.
Thank you. Committee. My name is Theron Levi Baquet, Assistant Special Counsel here in the Office of Special Counsel at the Sewage and Water Board of New Orleans. Building on what Director Scruggs mentioned, this is intended just as a straight, clear explanation of the bill's impact. The bill in question, of course, being House Bill 573, which has been amended to now the substitute bill, substitute House Bill 1243. So we just want to take you through the changes proposed to our existing enabling legislation and what we perceive that means for the board. The first change is to revise statute, Title 33, 4071A. This is the statute that kind of sets up the board's legal existence and speaks to the composition of the board and how we arrive at the members of the Sewage and Water Board. This first change would make the systems, the public water, sewage, and drainage systems of the city of New Orleans, a state entity using the language of the bill. And that state would be a state entity separate and apart from the city of New Orleans. This would strike the established composition of the board and the nominating process that's used to select new members of the board, of course, involving different civic partners like universities across the city. It would allow the city council to prescribe rules and regulations for the appointment, terms, and service of board members. Further, it would grant the council the authority to set rules governing the meetings and procedures of the board. The next changes are to revise statutes Title 33, 4072, starting with subpart A. This would add the City of New Orleans as Director of Public Works to the Southeast Louisiana Urban Flood Prevention Committee. That naming convention is mine. That is not the official name, but this is the committee that meets to discuss regional drainage preparation. 4072B1. This establishes legal authority for another public entity, unnamed, to assume some or all responsibility for drainage operations in the city of New Orleans. That's at the decision of the city council. It would make the city's statutory obligation to transfer all drainage employees and equipment to the board optional by changing the term shall to may. Subpart B2, this qualifies the city's responsibility to provide the same level of drainage funding and provided in fiscal year 2023. Ostensibly, and this is not parsed out in the statute, or the bill, excuse me, it would reduce the city's funding requirement by the degree to which operations are maintained by another public entity. It also establishes that the definition of public entity has the same meaning as provided in a different statute in Title 39. Moving on to 4073, this would strike the requirement that the mayor serve as ex officio president of the board. It would instead allow the board to elect a president and a president pro tem from among its membership. 4074, the change here, would allow the city council to adopt adopt rules governing the meetings of the board via ordinance adopted pursuant to RS 33401 4159.2. This requires all meetings of the board to be conducted in accordance with open meetings law, which of course, all of our meetings are already subject to open meetings law. This would, I guess, more clearly state that requirement. It would remove the statutory language that 6 members of the board constitute a quorum. The next change is to 4159.2A1. This would eliminate the Billing Ordinance Review Working Group, formerly established in statute and impaneled by the City Council. It would then change and give the City Council the authority to exercise broad regulatory and oversight over the board in the absence of any law to the contrary. This would include the ability to regulate and require council approval for different types of board action, some of them specified, some of them not. This bill uses the language including but not limited to, so we know that it identifies the authority to make these regulations or rules in the area of rates, fees, and charges, annual operating budgets, creation, adoption, and implementation of capital budget and improvement plans, board policies on billing, finance, operations, and governance, including bill modification, waiving interest or late charges, board contracts, and the election of the executive director and hiring of employees. Lastly, we're looking at other changes to 4159. This, the point A2 would limit the council's authority insofar as any proposed change or action is deemed to delegate powers held exclusively by the legislature, whether that change is inconsistent with applicable state law or impair any existing obligation of the board. So it subjects, of course, any new authority granted to the council to existing law to the contrary. The change at B1 would empower the council to open an investigation into any matter within the scope of its regulatory authority regarding the board. If I recall correctly, the existing statute limits that to failures of systems. This would allow the council to open an investigation into any matter. And at B1, excuse me, I think I have a typo there. But the last change would expand the council's ability to request the attendance of board representatives at any meeting of the council or council committee. This formally allowed requests for attendance at meetings of the Public Works, Sanitation, and Environment committees. So just making that more general. As I also mentioned, I'm not sure if it was as clearly stated in here, the bill does limit the council's authority insofar as it conflicts with state law. Nothing is allowed to impair existing obligations of the board. And I think that's generally the impact of this bill as we interpret it at this stage.
All right, thank you. So at this time, we'll just entertain questions. As I mentioned before, the role of the committee and the purpose of the meeting today is just to give directors an opportunity to process this new bill. Just for additional context for those in the room, everybody probably knows this, but the process this committee undertook when we were advised of House Bill 573 is that we, very similar to this, staff provided us a walkthrough. We asked questions and then provided our feedback. Actually, I missed a step. We did ask for a representative for the mayor's office to come by and help us understand the intended objectives of the bill. And then from there, we provided some guidance and feedback. That is essentially the process. We have a new bill, I think substitute bill introduced last week. So this committee has not had an opportunity to formally review the substance of it, and so that's what we're doing today. All right, so with that, I'm opening the floor for any questions from the committee or others around the table about the bill and its impact. Making note that we will not be asking counsel for legal advice in the open meeting, but anything else, feel free to put your questions on the table.
I'd like to ask a question about the process, Madam Chair. I know a couple weeks ago, I think there was a roughly 11-page document that was executed on behalf of the Governance Committee, which surprised me a little bit. I've served on a lot of boards throughout my life, and it was a little perplexing for a subcommittee of a public body to weigh in absent the full board. So obviously, this is a committee meeting today, so I guess question number one, will the next step be for this item to go to the full board to weigh in, or will the governance committee continue to be the spokesperson? Because I think it creates some confusion on whether or not the governance committee is speaking for the full board, or if the governance committee is speaking for a committee of four.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So two things. I really want to keep our questions germane to the agenda item. And this process that you're pointing to in the letter in particular is not an agenda item for today. So I'd like to, if we can, keep the questions to the agenda item. That said, I think special counsel or I, after the meeting, can follow up with you. There is no process other than what has been expressed in the meeting today. So we can follow up with you on.
And I'll
any other
certainly
steps.
respect that. Just know that any question I ask is in the interest of the public. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. I think everyone around the table is here in the interest of the ratepayers. At least that is my good faith assumption. All right, do we have any questions about the agenda item on the agenda today? In particular, House Bill 573 and its substitute 1243? If not, I can start off with a question.
I have a question. So when it says that it's a state entity separate and apart from the city, can I get a bit more clarification on how this will be retained in the proposed framework? Because I'm just trying to understand that part, and I don't know who necessarily answers that.
I can tell you my appreciation of the intent there is
Sure.
to, and this is my intent, I didn't write that language, but my appreciation of that is that since kind of the rest of the sweep of the bill is kind of bringing matters kind of more under the governance of the parish governing authority, I think there's a desire just to kind of clarify and maintain that the Sewage and Water Board remains fundamentally a state entity, a political subdivision of the state, which, you know, it is. It's a complicated entity because it's this kind of creature both of the Home Rule Charter and it's provided for in the charter. But that's my appreciation of the intent behind it. We can kind of ask some questions and clarify, but I think that's what it's trying to do.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, and then the shall to the may regarding the drainage equipment and staff. How will that impact the current framework that we're utilizing that was transferred over to SWIPNO? So is this like a reversal, or what's the proposed proposition on that?
My appreciation is that, and this is true of that, and it's also true of the sections relative to council oversight. It doesn't change anything. It provides for the possibility down the road that should the council elect to do so, that there may be a point when the drainage function of the Sewage and Water Board would be recaptured. And then if that were to occur, then there would need to be a corresponding change in funding. But that's my appreciation of it. I know there's some expiring drainage millages. It's part of a kind of, I think, broader policy goal to make governance of the local water function, drainage function, sewer function, local, to bring that under the regulation of people elected by New Orleanians, not folks elected in Shreveport. And, you know, when and if it becomes appropriate for the city to handle drainage, this would allow for that without us having to once again go back to Baton Rouge and lobby for legislation.
Under the proposed structure, does the ultimate responsibility for the performance of the utility, performance of services, does that change at all? Does that still sit with the organization, or is some of that responsibility shifted over to this other public authority that would have more control and oversight?
Well, I mean, the board is the board. The board is provided for in state law. It has powers that are defined by state law. It's established by the charter and has a function in the charter. The authority here, the regulatory and oversight authority of the council, that is not going to transfer functions automatically. I think the council could speak to that more. I don't think that they want to be the Sewage and Water Board, but I think they want the authority to regulate. And none of this is self-operative. So if this legislation were to pass tomorrow and the city council were to elect to do nothing, it would not divest the board of powers. The status quo would remain. And if and when the council elects to exert its authority, it could do so as part of an ordinance. There would be subsequent regulation, but my appreciation is that this isn't a desire to take Baton Rouge out of some of the business of regulating the Sewage and Water Board annually in these bills that have been passed, and that it wouldn't change the kind of governance or activities of the board, except as provided by ordinance. And we don't have those yet.
Okay. And just to, just one point of clarification, because I think this often gets confused. When you say the board, you mean the utility,
The Sewage and Water Board of New
not the
Orleans.
board of directors, right?
Well, I mean, the board is defined in 4072 as the board of directors, right?
Okay.
The Sewage and Water Board is the board of directors of the Sewage and Water Board, which may then employ folks and what have you. But I don't think there's I think the board is the entity.
Okay,
I mean, I'm happy for special counsel to tell me I'm wrong, but that's my appreciation of it.
okay. And I'm just making the point for language in the meeting today so that people understand when you reference the board, you're speaking about the entity and not necessarily this body.
Correct.
The entire body.
The Sewage and Water Board as an entity.
entity, okay.
And that entity is kind of its board of directors, which can then do all of the things it does. That's my appreciation of the structure.
All right, Director Peixoto.
Just for clarification, does this in any way negatively impact the pension plan of Surgeon Water Board or its employees?
I do not believe so. That was certainly not the intent. There's nothing on the face of this statute that purports to alter the roles, the responsibilities, anything related to pensions. And there's some express language that was added that makes clear that we can't alter the obligations of the board, vested rights. I don't think we could do that. And there's nothing that I've seen in 573 that is an intent to kind of mess with employees or their pensions.
Thank you.
And just a clarification on the language, the guardrail around impact to, special counsel may help me with the exact language, impact to existing obligations of the utility. That is all contractual obligations, bonds, what's the language specifically? Can you give it to us? You don't have it?
No, I don't have it.
Okay, if maybe he has it. Or you can tell me a page and we can look at it.
Director Scruggs. Page 10 or 15.
Okay.
Shall not impair existing obligations.
Can you give me a line number, special counsel?
Line number 12.
12, thank you.
That's the start of
The start of the paragraph, okay. So I'm just going to read it. Says, nothing in this subsection shall be deemed to delegate powers held exclusively by the legislature or to authorize the city council to enact any ordinance inconsistent with this part or other applicable state law. In exercising its authority under this subsection, the city council shall not impair existing obligations of the board. So I'm assuming that means existing contractual obligations, or is it broader than contracts?
Well, I'm trying to think what would be, I mean, the intent there was to track the kind of codal idea of any kind of existing legal obligation. By and large, I think the intent here was bonds first and foremost, not to violate anyone's bond covenants.
Okay.
You know, we also, any government body needs to be careful when it enacts legislation that impairs existing contractual rights. So I think that the goal here is not to to establish guardrails that prevents the council from putting the Sewage and Water Board in some kind of financial jeopardy. And I think the intent here is contracts, bonds, those types of things. I can't imagine a legal obligation that we would impair, but if it's a legal obligation, I think that's subsumed within the idea that we're bound by existing law. So I think that's covered as well.
Okay. So I mentioned at the start of the meeting, the matter that's happening with the industrial canal, and it brought to me the question, under proposed legislation, in a real-time operational event, would any of the chain of command or the processes for how we respond, would any of that change?
No, I mean, like I say, this is a prospective
Right.
statute that relates to governance. So if there were an emergency situation, nothing would change as far as I understand. Now, if at some point the council were to subsequently, pursuant to whatever regulatory authority is covered here, if there were some policies, if there were some rules that were enacted, I can't say never, but tomorrow, if this were enacted into law in a month and something happened over the summer, unless and until the council speaks, and my hope and expectation would be, and I'm confident they'd do it thoughtfully, it would not alter the existing status quo at all.
Okay.
How again does it impact selection of board members, terms of office, and the role of president and pro tem?
Well, the council will have to enact a series of ordinances that govern appointments and how that occurs, because that part of state law is being stripped out. And that is part of a kind of a philosophical approach that matters of local governance should be governed locally, and that the elected representatives of New Orleanians are kind of in the best position to enact these rules. As far as the responsibilities of the president, removing the mayor as president and allowing the board to elect its officers, nothing would change. The president would have the same powers. The bylaws would continue to govern. It just wouldn't be hardwired as an ex officio mayoral presidency.
Gotcha. And you mentioned the role of the state. When I was brought on to this board in September, seems like a long time ago, but not that long ago, there was a process, my understanding, that included the universities in the city coming together, the city council. I remember going before the city council and being confirmed there. I know the mayor at the time had some input and so on and so forth. So it was lots of different New Orleans entities involved in the process. That entire process is stripped out. And so the thought is that by ordinance, it would be replaced with
A structure to be decided by the council. And one thing I will say is that and maybe they wouldn't complain, but the burdens that we put on the presidents of Xavier, Tulane, Dillard, Loyola, they appoint a lot of different boards. They have a lot of different work. And it may well be for the council may love kind of how 4072 is, and they want to replicate it locally.
Okay.
But we think that should be a local decision. And so that would be for the council to decide. There are existing rules in the council's rules and regulations of their procedures in terms of how they go about confirming appointments and reviewing those. So that would be a subject of subsequent legislation, but it may well end up being exactly the same.
okay.
And some of that also, last thing I'll say, I know it says that it may be as provided by the charter. I can just speak to the mayor's view. Unless and until the voters of New Orleans speak, I think the constitution of the Sewage and Water Board has been defined in our charter. And so I think certainly Mayor Moreno would be loath to depart from that unless and until there was a vote of the people and kind of the people decided that they wanted a different board.
Okay. Any other questions from the
Yes.
director? Yes.
Thank you. This has been incredibly insightful and helpful, first of all. Being able to see these words through your lens has been great. Let me just say that. So where I'm trying to hope we can dig a little deeper and in layman's terms, if possible, when I read that and hear it, and please correct me if I'm misinterpreting, because I want to make sure we're clear, the drainage component that I think was referenced earlier. My concern is how that affects our borrowing capacity, our bonding capacity, right? And so in layman's terms, if I am wanting to lend money to Sewage and Water Board to replace, 108-year-old pipes and deal with drainage issues in Mass, and I'm prepared to issue a loan, well, this language tells me we don't know who owns that, right? It feels like we're adding ambiguity. No, and so that's why I'm asking for clarity, because when I read that, it says that, at the council discretion, we can move it back over. And I think we touched on it a little bit. I just want to dig a little deeper if we could, because that's where, I'm trying to find out.
In non-legal terms, I think Adam answered it, pretty well earlier, but it just gives the council discretion. It's not a mandate, so it really
Right.
doesn't change anything. It just gives the council that discretion. So nothing formally changes unless the council chooses for it to change.
But that's what I mean. If I'm a lender and I don't know who's going to have the responsibility 10 years from now, 15 years from now, right? I'm going to be more hesitant to loan the money.
Yeah. The only reason I would push back on that is because you're just shifting the authority from the state legislature to the council. Because just like the state legislature made the change a couple years ago, I was there at the time in the legislature, the state legislature still retains that authority. So there's nothing that prohibits them from coming back next year to undo what they already did. So you're simply shifting that discretion from the state legislature to the council. So,
Got it.
the argument around uncertainty, I would just have to push back on that.
No need clarification. That's what I need. No need for pushback. I just needed a light shine.
Not on you, but I'm just saying, anyone who's coming up with
I
that.
just needed a light shine on it. No, that's a great point. And so I get it. So at any point, even though when we're borrowing money as the utility, right, the state through various bills, right, can say we're shifting responsibility. And so the city council would retain that authority, is what we're saying. We're moving it from the state to the city.
Yeah,
That's the
and-
clarification.
And I think if you were to borrow and to incur debt, and that debt was predicated atop the Sewage and Water Board's ownership of kind of drainage, some function, one, the law is clear, we can't impair existing obligations, so we couldn't, if for some reason that was some covenant in bonds or in the indebtedness, that couldn't be taken away from you if it would put you in default with your bondholders. If prospectively, if the function were to migrate elsewhere to the city, then I would hope that the need to borrow would be
Yes.
lessened by the fact that you no longer have to meet the obligation to provide that service.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, we're golden. I appreciate that tremendously. This is good.
Other questions, directors? I have a question about rate setting. What's the implications for the stability of rate setting and general financial predictability? I know Director Kennedy spoke just a bit about lenders and how they see our governance structure and whether they look at it as stable and how that translates into how we're viewed as a borrower, sorry. But just financial predictability, is it that this shift is helping us to move in the direction of more predictability? Is it moving in the direction of more rate setting stability? Is that the intention? Can we just talk about, because those are important, so just want to understand impact there.
Sure, the desire here is not to foment chaos, right?
Okay, good.
Is not to create
That's good.
a unstable, unpredictable situation. In my experience, and Councilmember Hughes has lived this more than I have, but I represented the city council for a long time. One of the biggest complaints they get relates to drainage, to water, and so I think they are going to be loath to do anything that's going to kind of upset the folks and the basic services, the most important service in the community where they live and where they represent people. On the rate setting side, I will say that that is an area where there already is a fair bit of state law. The Sewage and Water Board will, set the rates, and that is currently subject to council approval. So
Right,
that's
correct.
already an area where, even without some of the regulatory oversight, the council already is a necessary player in that.
Correct.
So I don't know that that would change all that much, but that is a situation in terms of predictability where you already have a two-step dance between the board and the council, at least the way I see it.
Okay, yes, Director Cole?
This is probably a little off topic, but my understanding is there's no formal mechanism for us to, when I say us, the board, to request rate increases of the city council, like Entergy does, or I guess now Delta Utilities. No, they call it a rate case. Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding. Although I would need to go, I can't remember the last time that the board approved a rate increase and sent it to the council for approval. I would need to, I don't have a good answer to you on kind of that authority of the board to kind of force the question for the council and do kind of a rate case. And I mean, I don't have an answer to that.
If that's something that could be addressed in here, or if it makes sense, I think that'd be a good step in the right direction. Because right now, we're just doing this little dance and it's not working for anybody.
I do think the council, there are a number of ways that I think you could skin the oversight and governance cat. And one potential way, I think, is by treating kind of Sewage and Water Board rate setting more akin to an Entergy utility docket.
That would make sense, yes.
I think that is a possibility, because the goal here was to provide maximum flexibility, not in terms of, unpredictability, shifting standards, but to give the council the ability to regulate in a holistic way and to come up with something that makes sense without having to go back to Baton Rouge in a year.
Okay. Just a question about, and it may not be a particularly sophisticated or eloquent question, but we know that the city is in need of quite a bit of capital when it comes to infrastructure improvement. And so this committee is very focused on changes that might impact our ability to do that, right? You mentioned customer complaints and frustrations. I am a customer, ratepayer, and a voter, right? So I am not excluded from that group because of the role on this board. I'm actually here in part because of that. So I am concerned, right, about what this shift might mean for the ultimate goal of securing the capital we need to improve our infrastructure. So can you offer some feedback there, or reassurance, or even, directional intent around this being a structure that strengthens our ability to get the money we need to improve the services for the residents of the city?
I can give you the answer that I think the mayor would give if she were here, and I'll look to Councilmember Hughes. I think, the desire here is not to establish a system by which the city council can now starve out the Sewage and Water Board to meet other priorities,
That's good to hear.
right? And city council members, mayors are not incentivized to set up a system where their voters don't have water. I think the goal, one of the persistent criticisms of kind of the structure of Sewage and Water Board is you have a kind of diffuse governance such that, you have the state, you have the council, you have the board, and sometimes, it's not clear who to go, where the buck stops. I think the goal is that, and there are kind of 63 other municipalities that manage to balance the provision of core services and kind of ensure that you get the water you need, you get the trash you need, you get the streets you need. The hope here is that by kind of putting a greater locus of accountability on the council and the city, that is going to increase the attention to the Sewage and Water Board, that it becomes harder to point elsewhere when you have an ultimate responsibility over something. And so I don't think that the mayor desperately wants every service in the city to be good, to give citizens what they deserve. And that's what we're trying to get at. And to have it so that you, when your bill is high or when you have a problem, you know exactly where to go to. And you can go to the council, to the mayor's office and you know, make demands, and no longer can someone say, well, that's not me. So the desire is not to, you know, make the Sewage and Water Board a stepchild. It's to kind of bring it within the fold of the overall governance of the city.
Got it.
Can I ask a question? I want to join your point of, you know, funding, starting this out, whatever. Aren't we, and Graham, I can answer this, aren't we at least somewhat or all the way protected by other state laws that require us to operate it, you know, water as an enterprise fund, sewer, et cetera, any?
Well, that's the legislative charge is provided to provide the services, and you are getting a rate from the customer to pay for those services, water, sewer. Drainage, you're having a millage, ad valorem tax is on the books to pay for those. So those are the revenue sources to carry out the service.
So those revenue sources are spoken for. They can't be transferred to go make a park somewhere.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, they're for
I think that's
the
part of it.
specific services, yes.
Okay, that's,
And millages are dedicated,
Yeah, that's
right?
easy.
Like those are
you
easy.
can't start taking, you know, water fee, water service fee, and, you know, commingling it with other things, you know, at the whim of whomever. So,
All of those things are, once it goes to the voters, and parcel fees and those types of things have to go to the voters, when that happens, you're locked into, this is my understanding of the world, that's sometimes wrong. You're locked into kind of what was put to the voters, so you couldn't shift funding if you know, if there were a water fee approved for use by the Sewage and Water Board, is my appreciation.
yeah, so in my mind, nothing's changing in that regard.
Okay. All right, any other questions?
Just one quick one, the quorum change from 6, anticipation of unanimous or lower, and
I think that is because the open meetings law, which now expressly governs, contains a provision that defines the quorum of the body as the majority of the members.
okay.
So it's not, because we're governed by the open meetings law, it's already taken care of.
Okay.
A question about stakeholder input for this structure. Can you just speak to that?
The mayor has been running for office for, you know, a minute and talked to thousands of people. And before that, she was a council member at large for 8 years. So I think I don't know that we've kind of run the language of the bill by focus groups, but I think the substance of the bill is a product of years of engagement.
Right, okay, understood. I think my question, and I apologize, I wasn't specific. During the process of this this bill drafting, can you speak to stakeholders, particularly stakeholders who have been chiming in and reviewing and engaging on Sewage and Water Board governance before I even paid attention to it? have they been engaged in any meaningful way?
In terms of the specific drafting of the legislation, the wordsmithing of the legislation, and I've not been privy to kind of what all the different conversations that the mayor has had. I
Okay.
think that has happened kind of in consultation with Representative Hilferty. So the actual language has not been vetted. I think the concepts have long been discussed and have, the mayor has reached out to folks on that. In terms of just the statutory language, it's hard to given the constraints in which these things happen. We have an immediate opportunity. I don't know how much kind of specific engagement of that type has been done with the language, but again, I think the concepts have long been floated.
Okay, and it's still probably, I gave you guys the heads up that my questions might not be particularly sophisticated, but what I'm really talking about is not a review of the strike-through and additions to the existing law. I'm talking about the form, right? The new governance structure that's being proposed. And specifically because when in this committee and trying to understand the breadth of information that's out there, because there's so many reports on this three-headed governance structure, right? There's lots of different recommendations. And so I just want to understand, and I'm sure, those who are relying on the expertise of those folks, ratepayers who are relying on the expertise of those folks, to understand if entities and groups who have opined on this have been able to engage with you in the formation of this governance structure during this process, this year or the end of last year, or if it's just referring from communications and conversations over time that you bring to the table.
To the best of my understanding, it is more the latter, right? The BGR, whoever it is, my appreciation, it's either make the Sewage and Water Board totally independent, or you need to bring it more local, right? Like those are the two directions one could move. And so I think this reflects a desire to make it more local, and it's the product of that. So I don't know if that answers your question specifically. I can't speak to kind of every conversation, every stakeholder the mayor engaged in, but I don't think there's anything new or particularly surprising about the idea of kind of trying to bring some measure of local governance.
Okay. All right, any other questions? I mean, I have a lot more, but I think we've covered the topics at a high level. Any other questions from directors? No? Okay. All right, so we've contemplated executive session, as I mentioned before. The intent of that executive session, as called out with the statute, was to receive some legal advice from our counsel. I'm going to turn to special counsel. Can we proceed? Do I need to just call for a motion to move to executive session?
You need to call for a motion.
Okay. May I have a motion to move to executive session, please?
So move.
And may I comment?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
sorry.
1 second, sorry. Can we just get through the second, then I'll open for questions? Okay, so we have a motion to move to executive session that has been moved. Do we have a second?
I'll second it for discussion.
Thank you. All right, and now, questions?
Sorry that I've talked so much. So I would just suggest that discussing, I don't want to deny the committee or the board the benefit of legal counsel. I want to make sure, having litigated open meetings law issues for years and responded to attorney general complaints, that we do so in full compliance with laws. And what I will say is that kind of on the face of this document, which is what we distributed publicly, there is no legal basis for entering into an executive session to talk about legislation. If there is if there is litigation contemplated, there are some kind of procedures, there are some things that can be done that you can notice it in that way and give people notice and an opportunity. But I just don't think on the face of this, you know, talking with your lawyer about legislation is appropriate. It's not an exception under the open meetings law that I've ever seen. So I think there are ways to be briefed by your lawyer on specific questions. You know, if we're talking about this, I think it would be appropriate to do so publicly. So that's
So-
my.
Okay, understood. Any other questions? I want to respond to that question, but any other questions or comments about this motion? All right, so in response and also a question to special counsel, so my understanding is we have added to the agenda a open session discussion about the legislation. And now we would like to hear from counsel on legal advice and discussion about the potential for litigation and any other negative impact that might result in liability for the board and also this board, right, in exercising our fiduciary duty. So I'm confident that what we are wanting to discuss is appropriate under the open meetings law.
And I guess that's why I hear that, which is why I voted against the substitute to change the language in the agenda. If we want to talk about potential litigation, there's a path to do that. I just don't know that that was made manifest on the face of this agenda. So I don't want to, I'm not trying, you know, the mayor's cognizant of her fiduciary duties. I just don't think that kind of the litigation side has been appropriately noticed. And other than that, I don't see, in order to go into executive session, there's a listing of things in 42:17 that you can talk about. Pending litigation, current litigation, you know, competence, fitness, character. I just don't see the one for talking with your lawyer about pending legislation. That's my concern, that there is no section to the open meetings law that allows that. It's not to say that you can't be briefed in smaller, there's ways to get legal advice about these things, but I just don't see the exception that would justify the executive session.
Okay, so, and just to be clear for the record, we are not, and my question is not about whether or not open discussion about legislation without legal advice is accepted by the open. I think we're on the same page, okay? The intent for executive session, when requested and noticed, was to hear from legal counsel. And we noticed it to give notice to the community that this is something that may take place. Council has advice to provide. The community would like to hear it. The legislature is moving quickly, and we are simply looking to do our due diligence as fiduciaries, okay? So I think if the agenda, it was not specific enough to say legal advice regarding the legislation, so be it. Council, I need you to let me know whether or not we can move to have executive session and hear your advice, or whether, because the agenda did not specifically call out legal advice, quoted the statute correctly, but didn't call out legal advice, whether we would be in violation in order to move forward and hear that advice. If so, then as chair, I will figure out a way to make sure this committee gets the benefit of council so that they can operate their duty, but I just need to hear from council on what we can do here. And that is because we have a motion that's been seconded on the floor, and we need to vote on it. So if you can give us some feedback, and then we can move.
Sewage and Water Board as a client certainly has a right to have or seek legal advice and legal analysis of a bill or any position. It is what we reference in the Code of Evidence that conversation is an attorney-client privileged conversation, which is not to take place in an open setting. So based on that analysis, along with the fact that under 42:17A11, we believe that the conversation, the request of the client to have legal advice and legal analysis is appropriate to take place in executive session.
All right. Any other questions on the motion on the floor?
I did want to get clarification. I'm sorry. You mentioned that you recognize this right, but you saw a different path. And you said you did not see, if I'm mincing your words, please let me know. But I thought I heard you say that you didn't agree that it was in 4217.
So I guess I think I understand.
Because here's the thing, I think we all wanted to be on the same page, and that's why I asked for clarification earlier. If there's another statute that applies.
Sewage and Water Board is 100% entitled to get good legal advice. No dispute there.
Thank you.
The open meetings law is a statute with kind of punitive criminal consequences, and we, operate in a heightened environment. I will tell you, I think your argument is that the attorney-client privilege and code of evidence is the specific kind of the generic specific authorization under 421711. I understand that argument. I'll tell you what I did when I represented the council, because I took the position that unless it was kind of a concrete exception that I, couldn't get the 7 of them together as a body to talk about the legal implications of something that affected the city. So what I would do is I would, brief them individually or do smaller groups. It's inconvenient, and my feelings aren't hurt when smart lawyers have different views. My view is that the way to solve that is if you have specific questions for a lawyer or you want to be briefed, if it's not in the 4 corners of 4217 or something else, that you take care of it in smaller groups. I realize that's inefficient. That's just how I read the open meetings law.
So there's no.
I realize there's different views.
So there's no path that you see for the committee to get the legal advice?
Well, you can get legal advice, you just can't kind of convene a meeting for the purpose of doing it.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more of an indirect way to do it.
And that's what I mean. And again, layman, not an attorney.
Yeah.
If we have a committee meeting, there's no path for us to get legal advice when we're all together?
Unless it's a kind of matter that's one of the specific exceptions in the open meeting. Well, I think that's debatable. For example, if you want to talk about litigation, right? It either has to be pending litigation, it has to be threatened litigation pursuant to a demand letter, right? If the rule was anytime you wanted to talk to your lawyer, that, any privileged conversation was the basis for an executive session, those like narrow rules for litigation wouldn't make sense. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you've got a special counsel, I hear what he's saying. That's just my take and why I'll vote the way I vote.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Any other feedback, council, any feedback?
No, I mean, I understand what Adam is saying, and I think that we just have a different reading of the law. I believe that under the code of evidence, as I stated earlier, that it's a privileged conversation.
Yeah.
And a client can certainly ask for legal advice.
Yep.
That legal advice would be privileged information.
Correct. Okay, so I'm going to give this comment, and then we'll move to vote, and then we'll move on from there, depending on how the committee votes. So let me first say, Adam, appreciate your opining in on open meeting laws. We are a board of volunteers who have full-time jobs and are contributing to the city in this way. And it is a labor of love. And so none of us want to trip up on laws that maybe we just became familiar with a moment ago. So to the degree you're providing some guidance along with special counsel because you see something, thank you. So I don't want us to trip up that way. At the same time, we are trying really hard here to be good fiduciaries of this utility and its ratepayers. And so there is guidance we need from council who dug into it and prepared it for us. We want an opportunity to hear it. and to deliberate and consider it as a group. So what I might suggest is at the next opportunity that we can do so, that we plan to do so quickly. And if this committee does not want to move into executive session as a result of the discussion that has happened here, that we'll take it up as soon as we can so we can hear advice of counsel. All right, any feedback, questions, thoughts before we move on with a vote?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I certainly don't want to foul of any sort of requirements or law or whatnot. Is there a way for special counsel to distribute whatever it is you were going to present today by email? Is that appropriate? As far as like attorney-client privilege is concerned?
I don't quite, what are you asking?
Can you email us what you were going to present today?
No.
No?
Okay. All right, that's pretty definitive. All right, any other questions, comments before we take a vote? All right, the motion on the floor is to enter executive session. We've heard quite a bit of discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Oppose?
Nay.
All right, so the motion fails. We will not have executive session today. All right, moving on with the agenda, the next item is information item Louisiana House of Representatives Substitute Bill 1243. You have received it in hard copy around the table, and obviously it's already available to the public. Any other questions, thoughts around the information item? No? All right, with that, any public comment?
No public comment, Chair.
Okay, hearing no public comment, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded that we can get out of here. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. This meeting is adjourned.